There will not be a ceasefire in the Russia-Ukraine war. You may recall that we told you that when the issue was first broached after the previous call between Trump and Putin, when they said, hey, they want a 30-day unconditional ceasefire, that Trump had talked to Zelensky and said, yes, I've gotten him to agree to that. And then he called Putin and said, yes, I got him to agree to the same thing too. And you may recall that Putin says, yeah, I'm kind of categorically willing to talk about that, but there are a lot of nuances and details that would have to be worked out. But sure, I'll talk about it. We told you at the time, there's not going to be a ceasefire. There is no way, because there's no reason for Russia to do so. Now, in the time since that time, many in the West have continued to talk themselves into the thought that, well, maybe there can be. Maybe if we put enough pressure on Russia, that will bring them to the table. And then if we can get the U.S., if Europeans say it, if we can get the U.S., meaning Trump, to also agree to that, then we can definitely bring them into the possibility of a ceasefire on the Europeans' terms, on the Ukraine's terms. That's what they've been trying to get. They've been trying to manipulate President Trump into agreeing to do that. You may recall, I think it was a week ago this past Sunday, when Zelensky met with Macron, Starmer, Merz, and Tusk of Poland. And all together, the five of them banded together and said they demand that Russia accept on Monday an unconditional ceasefire, or there will be consequences to that. And they said, they added, this was really important, they got on the phone with Donald Trump and he was in agreement with that. Except that he really wasn't in agreement with that. He actually never was. When you had, and I want to say it was just the next day, I believe it was the 12th or 13th, where Vladimir Putin came out and said, hey, how's about instead of a ceasefire, we just meet in Istanbul on Thursday and we talk about not a ceasefire, but an end of war negotiation. And so he didn't agree to it then. And we've been telling you, this is really not that hard to figure out. That's not where Russia is going. They have no interest going. If you listen to the other side at all, you don't even have to interpret anything. They have been saying, we've shown many times a clip that Lavrov has made repeatedly, where he says that these kinds of ceasefire or a truce is a road to nowhere. He kept saying over and over. No one should have been surprised, and yet they seem to be. And then now the Wall Street Journal comes out today and says Trump tells European leaders in a private phone call that Putin isn't ready to end the war. Europeans said, shock and dismay. Wait a minute, you mean he's actually not interested in having a ceasefire? That all of our pressure and all of our threats and warnings of more sanctions to come isn't going to do that? And the answer is, yeah, that's right. And in fact, you may recall this from Peskov a few days ago, where he was saying, listen, after the phone call with Trump, he said, there's no deadlines. There cannot be any. It is clear that everyone wants to do this as quickly as possible. But of course, the devil is in the details. And he went on to explain that the details were the root causes of the war. And the Russian side has never deviated from its position that the first thing that has to be done is negotiated into the war, and only then will there be a ceasefire, which is why it's self-evident. So for the European side to say they are shocked and surprised that Trump admitted to them after this phone call that Russia is actually not interested in having a ceasefire to end the war, they're still looking at root causes. One would have to say, dude, where is your mind? Where is your head been? Why do you keep thinking that something is going to happen that the side with the most power keeps telling you isn't going to happen? And yet we're going to see here a string of things which just, and I hate to keep, this is not, I guess it's not so much beating a dead horse, it's just showing that the Western side just adamantly continues to refuse to see and acknowledge self-evident reality on the ground. And instead they keep digging themselves a deeper hole. Now, here is Kaya Kallas going to just, I guess, a couple of days ago talking about how I guess they've kind of made good on their threat that if there wasn't a ceasefire by last Monday, there would be consequences. And now here are their new sanctions consequences.
Our top priority remains a full and unconditional ceasefire. Ukraine agreed to it over 60 days ago already, but instead of seeking peace, Russia is still playing games. And Russia has escalated its attacks. The only option is to put more pressure on Russia to negotiate seriously. Today we adopted another sanctions package, And this package is also targeting Moscow's shadow fleet, among others.
Okay, that was, if you're keeping count, the 17th package, the sanctions package that Europe has done since the beginning of this war. They are already in the process of making number 18. And one can reasonably ask, if the first 16 didn't get you anything at all, upon what basis do you suggest that the 17th or the 18th will magically do it? If you could say that Russia's economy was on the verge of collapse, and I mean demonstrably so, zero or negative growth, inflation, 20, 30, 40, 50%, some crazy number like that. There are bread lines that people were trying to find gasoline. You could see physical manifestations that they were literally on the brink. Then you might be able to say, the straw that broke the camel's back. But there is demonstrably the opposite. Russia does have high inflation. That's the one thing they do have. It's the one red flag for themselves that they've been, but almost nothing else. You see plenty everywhere. You see their debt to GDP ratio is very low. I mean, we fantasize about having a debt to GDP ratio that low. So they don't have that pressure on top of them. They do continue to have economic outlets. They still have buyers for their oil, their other products, etc. All those things remain, and you see it's very vibrant. The quality of life is very high. You don't see public dissatisfaction. So none of those things are the case. So instead of a straw that broke the camel's back, this is going to be like a straw in the back of a dump truck that's mostly empty. So it's irrational to think that that's the way that's going to have any success. And one would have to wonder, why do you want to keep putting these things on there and taking actions that while you're doing it, the Ukraine side continues to lose. The Ukraine side continues to lose territory. But we're going to have answers for all that too from the Western side. And we're going to say, no, those things don't matter. Let me first of all go back to that Wall Street Journal article here, because I want to show you kind of where the West is and how they characterize this. And this is important because these are both the Western leaders as well as Western media outlets like the Wall Street Journal. In this article, it says on May 10th, Merz, Macron, Starmer, and Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk paid an impromptu visit to Zelensky in Kiev. They urged him to go along with what Trump wanted to expose Putin's unwillingness to end the war. Then they used Macron's cell phone to call Trump from Zelensky's official residence, telling him Europe and Ukraine were fully behind his call, Trump's, for a 30-day ceasefire. The Europeans publicly threatened new sanctions against Putin if he didn't accept the ceasefire. Putin responded to the rising pressure from Europe and Washington by proposing the first direct negotiations with Ukraine in 3 years. Trump seized on the offer and even at one point suggesting they could go to Turkey to join the talks. A meeting took place in Istanbul within days, but Putin didn't attend. He dispatched lower-level representatives who repeated demands that Ukraine deems unacceptable. After Putin's no-show in Istanbul, Europeans again pressured Trump to consider putting more pressure on the Russian leader. I highlight that part there because Putin's no-show, because the implication is that basically the pressure worked because Putin made this dramatic offer to meet in Istanbul with Zelensky, and then he did a no-show. He didn't show up. Except that's not what happened. Putin never offered to go there. He never did. They didn't send very low delegations that didn't have authority, which is what Zelensky claimed. To the contrary, what Putin offered was direct negotiations at the appropriate level. They intended it to be that level because they know it's working level stuff. You have to first figure out where there's even any room for any kind of negotiations. Then you get to the higher levels, which is at the ministerial level, Secretary of State, Minister of Foreign Affairs level. And then once that's agreed to, only then can you have head of state level come together where they finalize whatever has been agreed to. That's diplomacy 101. Like all things, there's many ways to do it. It doesn't have to be done that way, but that's the most common and realistic. And that's what Russia offered. And Zelensky just wants to appeal to the Western media and the Western mind. So he will characterize this the way he wants you to get it, which is, oh, they send these little guys here who have no negotiating and no authority to do anything. They have every authority that the president of Russia gives them. Putin says that here's your parameters, here's what I want you to do. And they were deputy foreign minister level. They weren't like some dude off the street in Moscow that don't know anything or don't have any authority at all. They had every authority that the Russian president gave them, whether it was Sergei Lavrov himself or some of his deputies. Medinsky was the one that led that. And he is far from an unimportant figure. In fact, he is a very central figure because in my view, he's kind of sort of analogous to Whitlock to Trump. Somebody that Putin trusts very much, and he put him in charge of that. So that was at the appropriate level from the Russian side. Nothing else was ever offered, but it's mischaracterized in the West as being something to make either the Russians look, in our mind, that they want it to be that they're being unreasonable. And if we show you that they're unreasonable, we can put pressure on them to make them compel to our side. They're still thinking that words from the West, embarrassment or some presumed embarrassment, will cause Putin to give in. And he has shown that they pretty much now view this in mocking terms. Not only does it not cause him to give in to them, it causes them to view the West even more disdain, ergo makes him less likely to give in to anything because he doesn't view this as a realistic situation. The Atlantic Council is another one. This is from the U.S. side here. And in some ways, this one's even worse. This is on, I think, on the 20. No, that's the 21st. That was just yesterday. Putin aims to destroy Ukraine and has zero interest in a compromised peace. Now, part of that is accurate, as we've said all along. Putin's not going to compromise on what they consider their core requirements, the root causes, the things that they have to have, their minimum objectives, which to us are maximalist from our perspective. But then you get into why he says it. And there's where we have a difference of opinion, and where this continues, this kind of reasoning undermines our ability to reach a negotiated settlement or an end to the war that's going to be beneficial to the Western side. In this article, they say that, quote, to Putin, the emergence of an independent Ukraine is a symbol of Russia's post-Soviet humiliation and a potential catalyst for the next stage of his country's retreat from empire. According to this twisted imperial logic, if a province as quintessentially Russian as Ukraine is allowed to break away and establish itself as a modern European democracy, the entire Russian Federation will be in danger of disintegrating. That is so irrational and logic and evidence-free as I can hardly imagine it. If that was the case, Ukraine had been independent since 1991. Now, up to 2024, so, all of those years, I mean, what is it, 30-something, 34 years, whatever the number is. That's a long time. Russia had never made any move before that. Did the Russian Federation crumble and fall apart? It wasn't even on their radar. And to suggest it is the only way you can believe that is if you don't know anything at all about European history. You don't know anything that's happened in the world since 1991. And yet this passes, the Atlantic Council passes for elite thinking in the West. This is harming us, folks, because most people don't have the time to do what we do and dig into this stuff for hours every single day. They count on figures like this, and the Atlantic Council in the past has done excellent work. This is not excellent work. This is more of the same of disinformation, not even misinformation. This is an intentional intent to make you believe a set of facts that aren't true. And the reason is because if you see Putin in these maniacal views that he's just, eyes all twisted, he's like Hitler. He just wants to go and take Czechoslovakia, the Sudetenland, then Poland, and then France, etc. That's what they're trying to do. They're trying to make you think this is Hitler part 2. And that, my God, we have to stop him now or Paris will fall at some point in the future. That's where this is going. And that's why it's harmful, because the contrary is true. I'm going to show you that in just a second. But here, one more from the Kiev Post itself, from the Ukraine side. It's not limited to the West, and this is probably not that much of a surprise. But the headline there is Trump. Putin doesn't want peace because he's winning. But is he winning? And inside the article there, it says, quote, citing data from a deep state analysis, it says that despite the numerical advantage Russian forces enjoy, they remain a long way from achieving Putin's stated aims. Since January, despite a claimed upsurge in its offensive, Russian forces have taken the equivalent of only around 0.15% of Ukraine's territory. The data show this pace of advance is less than a third of that achieved at the end of 2024, falling from about 125 square kilometers to 41 square kilometers a week. So you want to show as good news that you only lost 41 square kilometers per week. Now, a couple of things. First of all, that assumes that that's all Russia can do, that's all Russia did. And I'm sure that those numbers are probably right. That matches with other things that I've seen. So probably there is a reduction in the pace of Russian acquisition from the end of 2024, which was at a very highly accelerated rate. Probably it would have been better to say, more accurate to say, what was that compared to year over year, the previous same period of time from 2024 in the first part, not just the last, because we already know that was in an upsurge. I would wager they're probably closer to equivalent because this one turned out to be a big surge. That's the first point here. Second point, maybe the bigger point, they're still advancing. They're still capturing territory. And I showed you Julian Brufka's video from a couple of days ago that in the previous 6 weeks, there is substantial loss in the most important areas in the Pokrovsk area where Russia had run into some challenges in one particular. They were trying to surround Pokrovsk from the south. That kind of has petered out, and it truly has. So Russia says, all right, we're going to try from the north here. That's not petered out. As a matter of fact, now they're making more advances in the northern part of that, and still with the net that they're going to come to a position where they can get it into an operational encirclement. So they have accomplished quite a bit in the last 6 weeks. But your side, even if that was the only point you wanted to make, you still have to say, hang on. Okay, it's slowed. It hasn't stopped. And what do you have on the Ukraine side, on the Western side, that can stop it and then reverse it? Because if you can't show a viable path to where we can continue forward and stop this first and then start to reverse it, then you just have a slower death than a faster death. But you still have a death. That's the reality here that just cannot be acknowledged by either the Ukrainians themselves at the official level or anybody in the West, it seems, or very many at any rate. And that is the anguishing part of this, because you have all of these Ukrainian people that are not subject to the spin. They're not subject to what you claim and the positive, the lipstick you want to put on this pig. They're not subject to that. They die because of it every day. This is what angers me. I have to be honest with you. We claim that we care about the Ukrainian people. We claim to care about democracy and freedom and holding back the tyranny and all this stuff. And yet, even with these things that I'm showing here from the West side that we're seeing, they're partially acknowledging the truth and then trying to spin a different interpretation of it. But the spin never stops reality. And the men on the ground in Ukraine pay a fatal, permanent price every freaking day for it. So you claim to want to help Ukraine. You claim to want to stand up for Ukraine, people who are making these arguments. And all you do is ensure more of them pay the final price. They'll never get to live to see another day. There'll probably be multiple hundreds, maybe 1,000 Ukraine people will die today. And then those who survive today, another group of those people are going to die the following day, and so on until eventually collapse. It almost can't be any other way, because you can't map out any kind of rational possibility of fully stopping and then reversing. And in the absence of that, the only thing that you're doing is just applauding and patting yourselves on the back for keeping the Western public misinformed, while everything that you stand for disintegrates around your feet. And listen, you can also count another category there, is that the $61 billion package passed by the Biden administration, the last big one that the United States did in May of 2024, is just a trickle now. Almost all of that has been given away. The Biden administration themselves tried to really rush it out the door before they left office. And what's been left is continuing on, but it's just a snail's pace. It's just a trickle. And at some point, even that trickle is going to run out. Europe is already doing all it can. They keep tossing in these little packages here and there, but it's minuscule compared to what's needed just to maintain the slow pace of loss. And there will come a point here in a few months to where you won't even be able to do that. And the losses will accelerate, not because of absence of courage or willingness of the Ukraine side to fight, but because they just don't have the ammunition. And we've been showing you here recently, there is growing evidence that the foundation is cracking among the ability of the Ukrainian armed forces to continue to fight, with the high-profile resignation of the 147th Mechanized Brigade commander, the firing of the 59th Brigade commander, and I'm, according to many Telegram channels on the Ukraine side, that's the tip of the iceberg, and there is even more dissatisfaction at the ground. You continue to have the issue with large numbers and percentages of their troops leaving the fight, abandoning the fight. They're still running away. They're desperate to not get grabbed off the street, etc. All the things that show you that the foundation and the fabric of the Ukraine armed forces is cracking now. And it's anybody's guess how much longer it'll be before there's finally going to be some a major break. Now, I mentioned to you a second ago that we're mischaracterizing what the Russians say, but if you listen to what the Russians say, you'll get a pretty good idea what they are. I'm going to show you here Sergei Lavrov from a video that was posted earlier today. He said that, listen, we've been looking for European-wide security for the long time, as opposed to what that Atlantic Council says, which is Russia just has this, wild-eyed look that it wants to capture territory and just take over everything and recreate the Russian Empire, is the phrase that they use. They're saying, listen, we have always and only said we just want a European security architecture where everybody can live in peace.
It stated that no country, no organization in the OSCE region has the right to claim dominance within the organization. This principle was reaffirmed word for word in 2010 at the OSCE summit in Astana. After that, we insisted that our Western partners adhere to this principle, given that they, without the slightest hesitation, despite all these high-level commitments they had signed, continued NATO's eastward expansion. Contrary to our repeated warnings that this posed direct threats to Russia's security and violated the principle of indivisible security.
That's been the consistent statement by the Russian side. For years and years, they've been saying that. The OSCE, which we are all in the West were signatories to include the Russians, it had a provision that said nobody's security can be ensured at the expense of another member's security. Russia cited that forever. And we had, David Fields on, a former defense attaché in Moscow for Britain. And he said, listen, we used to have good relations up until 2013. We actually had mill-to-mill, military-to-military relations. We had good discussions back. So there was at least, the presence of discussions, and all that ended after what happened in the Maidan in 2014 and Crimea and all that stuff that happened. And then the civil war that erupted, et cetera, those are broken. And so at that point, then we don't really care about the documents that were signed there. Now then, we want security for Ukraine at the expense of Russia and the NATO coming in, et cetera. All that is well known. We knew that before, and Russia had been telling us. I wrote an article before this war started, and I said, listen, this stuff has been going on for a long time. And after it, I pointed out, it was a 15-year period where Russia had been warning, going back to the Munich Security Conference. I think it was in 2007, where Vladimir Putin came out and said, if you continue to expand NATO into Ukraine, it is a national security imperative, and we will respond to it. We consider that an existential crisis. So he said it then. And then again in 2008, when the NATO ignored what he said the very next year and declared that Ukraine would be a member of NATO, et cetera, they continued to warn. They warned all the way up to December 2021, where they said, if you keep and persist on this, we will use military technical means to resolve the situation. You had then Jens Stoltenberg defiantly and in your face say, nobody will tell us who can and cannot come into NATO. We will decide, and at some point, Ukraine will come in. at which point then Russia said, okay, I got it. That's your position. Here's mine. So that's where we are right now. And Putin, now then where we may be going, here yesterday was addressing some people. He went to Kursk where, the Ukraine side had made this penetration for 7 or 8 months. Russia pushed them out. Now he went down to talk to some of the people, and he's explaining categorically what they're still fighting for.
Понятно, с кем мы воюем, да? Если мы даже напрямую уничтожают памятники времен Второй мировой войны. Понятно. Вот это дает нам все основания говорить, что это люди с идеологией неонацизма. Что же еще? А как по-другому определить? Так и есть. И даже они и на конкурсе идиотов заняли бы 2-е место. Почему? Потому что идиоты. Делают то, что они делают, они показывают, кто они такие есть.
So you see, he views with increasing contempt the Ukraine side, because in his view, they're neo-Nazis. They're the same Nazi ideology. They keep calling them Banderites because Stefan Bandera from the World War II period of time was famously a Ukraine that was fighting on the side of the Nazis. And he's still hailed as a hero in there today. So that's what they're talking about there. And of course, as you know, we showed you that in the 80th celebration in Moscow on May 9th, their Victory Day, they spent a lot of time in the weeks heading up to that, directly linking their special military operations, they call it, with the Nazi fight in World War II. So they said, just like we finished it then, we're going to finish it this time. We've shown you that prior to that, Putin said, we will surely win this war. He continued to use that term. Now, the claim that the Trump got him on I want to say it was the 12th, it was Monday the 12th, to agree to a 30-day ceasefire, which is what the Western European leaders I've already previously mentioned said. Here 2 days before that, Putin very clearly again laid out the Russian objectives.
I'd like to reiterate that Russia is ready for negotiations without any preconditions. The hostilities are on. The war is raging, and we suggest to resume the talks that were stopped not by us. What is bad about this? Those who want peace must support this. And I would like to express gratitude for the mediating efforts on the peaceful track to resolve the Ukrainian crisis that is made by our foreign partners. I mean, China, Brazil, African and Middle Eastern countries, and recently the new administration of the United States also making these efforts.
So you see there, they say, listen, we have never been interested in a ceasefire first, most assuredly not an unconditional ceasefire. We are interested in addressing the root causes of this war, and we will meet without any preconditions at the appropriate level, which he said in several separate venues, as well as other members of the Russian government. So they continue to say that. So no one should be surprised that they have not agreed to a ceasefire unconditionally. They've never even implied that they would. To the contrary, they've said they wouldn't have an unconditional ceasefire. So for the West to say, oh, well, they didn't agree to it, so now let's put sanctions. I mean, obviously, that's just a fig leaf because they already knew they weren't going to. So that means that the Western side already knew they just wanted to put more sanctions, as we saw Kaya Kellis talk about. And again, you can't get past the fact that where is the intellectual powerhouse and capacity to recognizing that you're trying to go down a road that can't succeed. And then now here you have President Trump. You may recall in his Truth Social when he talked about after that phone call where he said, hey, it was a really great phone call. If it wasn't so, I would have told you he was happy about it. We've shown you in the Axios report after the phone call to the European Union that they were kind of surprised. Those European leaders were going, wait, what? Because why are you excited about it? Because Putin didn't change anything at all. Because Trump wants the war over with. That's where he's at. And one wonders if this information coming out and that where Trump allegedly told the European leaders that it hadn't been reported before today, that, yeah, he's actually not interested in ending the war. He's interested in winning the war. And he'll reiterated everything we've been telling you from the beginning. It's not hard to figure out, but apparently he actually told them the truth behind closed doors that, listen, if he gets what he wants, in the terms that they have laid out, demilitarization, denazification, withdrawal of all troops from the 4 administrative borders of those oblasts, no NATO, and demilitarization as well. If they get all those things in negotiations, then they'll bring the war to an end. Putin does want the war to come to an end on those terms. He does not want the war to end before they have their terms. He does not want the war to end in a way that's going to just set the stage for another war. So Zelensky continuing to say, which he has this week, that he wants security guarantees. He even wants Western troops in part of his country to the end to as a deterrent from the Russian side. He wants to maintain his army in the full size. I think we've shown you his comments after that phone call with Trump that he says, I'm still not going to give away any territorial sovereignty. I don't have the right to do so. We're going to continue to have our army, all that kind of stuff in direct contradiction to the Russian position. So whether there's talks in Istanbul, whether there's going to be some talks in the Vatican to be coming up, which is being floated at the moment, it doesn't really matter where they are because the positions are already on the table and are not changing. The European side doesn't seem to want to change any of its stuff. The Russian side has no intention of changing its position. They've been unbelievably consistent with their claims. We don't like them. We don't agree with them, but they are. And then you get down to the whole point. Who has the capacity to compel the other side to agree? Does the Western side, the Ukraine side, do they collectively have the ability to compel Russia to concede to their version of what the end of the war should come like? That's what Kaja Kallas is saying. That's what Chancellor Merz from Germany is saying. Keir Starmer, Emmanuel Macron, several others. They're saying, yes, these sanctions will force Russia. That's a mythical wishful thinking. That's all it is, because there's no evidence that can work. Again, that was your 17th package. And the first number of all the rest of them were with the full concurrence of the United States and participation. In the aftermath of all this stuff, and at least as of the time we're making this video, President Trump has still said, I'm not going down that path. Lindsey Graham's trying to get it. Apparently he wants that. But so far, Trump is going, I'm not putting any more sanctions on him because he's looking beyond the war. He's looking for some transactional business trend deals to be done afterwards. That's where his mind is already thinking. He's still thinking he wants to try and get some of these minerals. And I've heard some reports that suggest that there has been some discussion with Moscow that, hey, even if you get these territories here where some of these minerals are, it'd be cool if we can have a deal to where we can participate in some of that. We'll have to wait and see whether that's true, but that's not out of character with where Trump's mind is and why he's looking beyond the war. So he recognizes this. Now, some have speculated in the news media today that maybe this is Trump's way of saying he's going to walk. We've been talking about since April the 18th. They've been talking about this. We're going to walk, etc. But then the question is, when will he do it? He was asked on NBC News on the 4th of May. When will that moment come? He just said, well, I've got a red line. I have a red line. I'm just not sure. I'm just going to tell you where it's at, but there is one on there. That's what he said. And so now then the question is this it? Have we reached that or something close to it? Maybe we have. And listen, I'm obviously for that. I've been for it. I've suggested that that's where he should go. And if this is where President Trump wants to go, I think that he would serve himself much better if he would just declare it so and proactively get there and say to the Western side, fellas, this is where I'm going. If you don't want to go there, if you do want to go there, great. Let's all try to work together to try and make the best of this. But if you don't, then you're on your own because I'm not going to underwrite failure. I'm not going to continue to do another package of and one beyond that of sanctions that all it's going to do is make Russia more angry. It's not going to change the outcome. So if it's not going to change the outcome, if the outcome is going to be Russia's going to get the things they're demanding, which makes the most sense for your own country, for the interest of your people, to antagonize unnecessarily further Russia so that once it's over, they're even less willing to maybe even re-engage with some of this energy infrastructure, to return on some of these pipelines, to give you less expensive gas, to make your economy less expensive to operate and make more opportunity for your companies to make money? Or do you want to do what Trump is saying, which is this thing's going to be over with Let's just get it over with on the least ugly terms possible, get the war off the table, and let's move on to try and get back into some kind of normalization. It'll take a long time to do, but at least this is something we can start the process here, as opposed to what the Europeans are trying to do, which is to push that date off as long as possible and make the conditions as worse as possible when you finally get there. That's what the various parties are doing right now. And then you have kind of sitting back on the side, you have the Russian side, which is just going, we haven't changed anything and we're not going to. This is how it's going to end. And we have the wherewithal to make it happen so. And so our choice before us now is we want to end the ugliness of it where it's at today, or do you want to keep with the fiction and allow Russia to continue to operate and saying, then we'll simply seize on the ground what we need, even if it takes another year. You recall that I put on here, Medinsky, the lead negotiator for the Russian side in the last Istanbul round, said maybe it'll take another 1, 2, 3 years. But Russia has that mentality and that patience. We'll keep going that long and we'll eventually win. And there's no evidence that any of that is just bluster. They definitely have the capability. They have the historical propensity. And they have the mentality right now that they're going to continue to pay that price, whatever it is. That's where we are, folks. So when you hear all this nonsense here about, Trump shocked everybody, no one should have been shocked. And when you see him not wanting to put on sanctions, that's likely the reason why is because he's looking beyond the war here, which is what we should be doing too. If you care about the Ukraine people, if you care about the Ukraine state, I don't remember if it was either Peskov or Lavrov, one of the two. We showed you the quote earlier where they said, this is the last chance. This is the last chance for negotiations, or possibly it was Putin himself. I'm sorry, I can't recall right offhand. One of the senior Russian leaders said, this is the last chance for negotiations. If this is not accepted, the next thing is going to be military victory, and we'll press on, however long that takes. And it could take another year, 2 years. Maybe, I doubt 3 years, because I don't think there's much possibility for the Ukraine armed forces to maintain this continual slow slaughter. I just don't see how they can sustain it. So I doubt that it'd actually take that long, but at some point it will come, and that's where we are. Thanks very much for watching today. By the way, coming on in just about 20 minutes, we have a new guest on today that's going to have a very interesting perspective. This is an American that has been fighting on the Russian side, not the Ukraine side, but on the Russian side of being a UAV, a drone operator. And he's going to come on and tell his story. You can agree with it, you can disagree with it, but like we love to do on this channel, we give you all different views. Some of them views like one of the guests we had on yesterday or day before, some people didn't like, but we want to give you different views. We don't want it just to be an echo chamber. But so you're going to want to come find out. I'm really eager to talk to this American kid, Will. And that's all we'll use for his name today. But tune in at, let's see, 12 o'clock. Yeah, so just about 15, 20 minutes from now. We'll see you then on the Daniel Davis Deep Dive.